This podcast episode was made possible in part with support from Sacred Rights, a project funded by the Henry Luce Foundation and the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation and hosted by Northeastern University. Sacred Rights is a project that supports public scholarship on religion and provides resources and networks for scholars of religion committed to translating the significance of their research to a broader audience. I recommend you learn more about Sacred Rights on their website at sacred-rights.org or find Sacred Rights on Twitter at sacred_rights. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Darius Benton. Dr. Benton is an assistant professor of communication studies at the University of Houston downtown, where he teaches courses in organizational communication and religious communication. Dr. Benton earned his Ph.D. in organizational leadership from Regent University and his Master of Divinity with a certificate in religious education from Emory University. He is an interdisciplinary scholar and professional educator with varied experiences from pre-K through collegiate levels. He is an ordained minister, executive leader, and social scientist. On this episode, we discuss his years of working in broadcasting, secondary education, and becoming a professor. We then dive into his essay, Get Ya Lesson, gleaning wisdom from African American K-12 educators who endured the desegregation of public schools, from the edited collection book Critical Race Studies Across Disciplines, Resisting Racism Through Scholactivism. We then turn our attention to his article examining website-based mission statements of traditionally black Methodist denominational churches in the top 10 cities for African Americans in the United States, from the Journal of Communication and Religion. You can find his work at his website dmbenton.com. Dr. Benton is a member of the 2023 Henry Luce Foundation cohort from Sacred Rights. Please enjoy our conversation. Dr. Darius Benton, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I'm delighted that you're here. I'm wondering if we can start off and have you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience so they know who you are and what you do.
All right, my name is Dr. Darius Benton. I am currently Associate Professor of Communication Studies at the University of Houston downtown. I also have a background in ministry as well as secondary education. And I flirted around a little bit and spent some time in radio and television before that. So although I haven't really been in the world a long time, I have done a lot in my short period of time. I have a Ph.D. in organizational leadership from Regent University, a Master's in Divinity from Emory University with the emphasis in Christian education, religious education and youth ministry. And then also I have a Bachelor of Science from Norfolk State University in mass communication. So I have a very diverse background that's allowed me to do a lot of different things, but it's all been in one common direction and one common path.
Wonderful. I do want to know a little bit about some important moments throughout your academic journey and your professional journey. Let's start with communication. How did you get interested in the field of communication and communication studies in the first place? Tell me a little bit about that process.
Oh man, so we have to go way back
Yes.
for this one. When I was a young person, my mom said it seems like every week I changed my career. I went through wanting to be a veterinarian, to a firefighter, to a doctor, to an actor, to a musician, to a lawyer, just pretty much all the things I kind of flirted around with or bounced around in different ideas. But I think that the thing that honored me the most and that I found most passion into was television. I really got engrossed in watching television. It was like a thing I had to do every day. But it wasn't just watching for entertainment. I often watched to really understand from a different perspective. And I had questions like, okay, how did they do that? What does this mean? What is the impact on the audience going to be? Or how does it make me feel? How does it make my friends feel? I would tend to watch, when I went to movies, I would watch the crowd and the audience just as much as I would watch the movies. This is back when VHSs and DVDs were out, and I would watch the director's cuts of the movies and the just to kind of learn the behind the scenes. And, I would watch a lot of times for errors in the films and errors in TV shows or places where editing didn't quite connect. And so I realized that that was a thing for me. I began doing internships even while I was in high school. I had an internship at a radio station and ended up participating in a show a weekly show they had for youth. And it went from me just being a participant on the show to me being one of the regular hosts of the show, co-hosts of the show, to me running the boards and actually doing the audio engineering while the show was going on and DJing
Amazing.
music in the midst of the show. So that became kind of my path. And I realized this is really fun. I like doing this. I like having a place for my voice and my voice being heard. And even picking out music, I became somewhat obsessed as well with Oprah Winfrey and Barbara Walters and other talk show hosts. I know they're feminine females, but for whatever reason, they seem to do a better job than some of the male hosts at the
Yeah.
time. And so I really was like fanned out for Oprah. And I had kind of built in my mind that when she retired, I was going to take her spot and be the male Oprah.
Amazing.
Those were things that's kind of how I got into it. Went to college, was a mass communication major, and hit the ground running. The thing they often said was that you had to get internships, you had to get experience, do the grunt work, and so I was definitely doing that. I was working at the campus radio station, also working at the campus television station. I had TV shows. I had a regular radio show each week that I hosted and DJ for that show. I had some great, great, great opportunities through that. I had a few more internships. And I think when I started to recognize that it was something else that I needed to be doing, was that I had an internship at a news station and realized that my heart was a little bit bigger than you needed to have for that type
Mm.
of news. And at that particular time, you didn't have the Oprah Winfrey Network, you didn't have Tyler Perry, you didn't have a lot of the shows that exist now that are really about seeing the story through. It was just kind of about I'm going to report the news and go. And so I recognized that if I went to, watch a story being shot or reported on, and somebody, their son might have just gotten killed, and you would go in, get the story from the grieving mother, and then you're out and on to the next story. Where I would be sitting at home that night thinking about, well, what happened? How can we help this person? What happened to the end of that story? So I would oftentimes want to see the story concluded, offer some type of assistance. I realized it was a space in my heart that wanted to help people. And I didn't really see that as being an ongoing or dominant force at that particular time in media, in news and television and radio. So I started to kind of look for and seek out different purposes. And around the same time, and this is when I was in college, I started in ministry. I started to really focus on my relationship with God and develop my spirituality in a different way. So the church I was attending, I ended up being the youth pastor there. One of my classmates at the time told me about opportunities to substitute teach. I only had classes at that particular period on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I was pretty much free Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I said, okay, that's something to do. Put a few dollars in my pocket.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, during that period, I actually loved going to those schools.
Amazing.
And I went to some of the more difficult schools that people didn't want to go to. I thought it was fun for whatever reason. And I connected with the students, even though I looked younger than some of them at the time. So that was a constant joke because as soon as I walked in the room, they would be like, how old are you? That was the first question they would often ask. A lot of times, other teachers or administrators, they would tell me when I'm walking down the hall, you need to go to class. And I'm like, I work here.
Amazing.
That was an interesting period, but it was a very effective time for me. And it showed me some different things about myself that I didn't realize. So when I was approaching time to graduate from undergrad, I went through my first struggle about, okay, what's my next step? I knew I had, really put a lot of time in my media career. In my mind, I wanted to graduate and go work for MTV or BET or something, be a VJ, move in
Mm.
that direction. And I know some people out there may not even know what a VJ is,
Oh,
but
I do.
but yeah, they hosted the music videos, which is probably something else a lot of people out there don't even know what they are anymore.
Yeah.
But that was like a really big thing back then. And I was just like,
Amazing.
maybe I'll jump on a show like Teen Summit or something like that. But then there was a part of me that was like, well, if I'm going to do ministry, I need to be trained for ministry. And I had an aunt, one of my aunts was a pastor at the time, and she asked me a pivotal question. She said, if you are, going to work in an area where people would trust their souls to you, why wouldn't you want to be trained? She said, would you go to a doctor that hadn't been to medical school? And I was like, no. She was like, well,
Hmm.
go to a lawyer that hadn't been to law school. And I was like, no. And she said, but you want somebody to trust their eternal soul to your teaching, but
Hmm.
you're not going to go to theology school. And I was like, okay. So it was one of those prayers, and I only applied to one school, which actually was actually one of the top schools in the country. I didn't even know that at the time. But I applied to one school, and I said, all right, God, if this is the direction you want me to go in, get me in, and you pay for it. And so I applied, I did all the things. I went on with my life. I was still looking at opportunities in DC and New York, other places in media. I was also offered jobs by some of the principals at the schools that I was working at. They were like, hey, if you want to work here next year, you got a job, after graduation. So I had a few options. And one day I went to my mailbox, and it was an admission letter to Emory University. And I said, oh, I guess we're doing this.
Nice.
so, so I ended up going to Atlanta, moving to Atlanta, starting theology school there. That was one of the toughest periods of my life. I was challenged in ways I didn't even know I could be challenged academically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, because that was a very interesting process because it didn't just challenge you academically, but it really challenged the core of your faith, of your belief systems, all of the nursery rhymes and Bible stories that you learned growing up. It challenged all of that and really made you learn to stand in and your own belief systems, and even be open to the evolution of your theology and your belief systems. So fast forward through that whole period, which was very pivotal for me. When I finished that, I said, okay, I'm going to go to some major church and be a youth pastor. This is what I want to do. Or I'm going to find a bridge between ministry and young people. I want to create opportunities for them to learn about faith through media. I had a devised a plan, and of course that was around the time of the Great Recession, I guess as they call it, and
Hmm.
all of the housing crises and all of that, and people were getting laid off, and they didn't have jobs, that existed 2 years ago, didn't exist anymore. I had done an internship as well at a radio station in Atlanta, so I was looking at that, but things were just in a weird place. And of course, what happens? God opens the door for me to work in the school district in a position as a graduation coach, which was almost similar to basically being a youth pastor in a school setting. So,
Hmm.
like, okay, here we go with this again. So, it's just interesting how those pathways just kept kind of crossing themselves. I worked in the Atlanta public school system for several years prior to starting my doctoral program. And at that point, I was in a phase of, do I want to stay in education? Do I want to do other things? Do I want to work in ministry? Do I want to get back in media? And these are all questions that continue to revolve almost every day of my life. So as I started my PhD program, I knew that I wanted to. I was like, I already have 2 degrees. I'm not necessarily using, although I'm using them, or I'm not necessarily working in those fields. So let me get a degree in something I know I could use anywhere and everywhere,
Yeah.
and it would be beneficial. So I moved into, getting my PhD in a business related field, which was organizational leadership. And then I learned as I got more into that degree that I really could fit it to the things that I'm passionate about. So I was still able to look at some ministry related things, some education based things, some media based things. And of course, I got tied into most of the communication theories part of the degree as well. So it's like I kind of still navigated towards the things that were important to me. Fast forward now, I'm a college professor, directing a master's program, teaching in my field, doing research, and now trying to rebrand myself and to create another bridge back into the media world. So it's like this big, I want to say circle, but it seems more like a roller coaster of just passions and influences that seem to collide and recycle over and over and over again. So that's a very long, short summation of kind of my background and my experiences.
Well, it's perfect because, I'm a teacher. I taught in high schools for a long time.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, so I have that a little bit in common with you. So I resonate with that. I'm also a religious studies teacher. in high school. So
Nice.
my interest kind of overlap with you is in the fields of religious studies, but also teaching. So whenever I saw some of your work that you sent over, I was like, oh, this is great. We're talking about schools and things that I remember studying in my own graduate work a while back. So, do you want to talk about some of your work now? We can go into some discussing some of the actual writing and research that you've done. I'd love to know some more.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the first article that you sent me. You sent me a piece called Get Your Lesson, Gleaning Wisdom from African American K-12 Educators Who Endured the Desegregation of Public Schools. It's from the edited essay collection book, Critical Race Studies Across Disciplines, Resisting Racism Through Scholactivism. How did you get involved with this project, with this book in the first place?
I actually participated in a workshop or conference that was held through my college when they were celebrating the 400 years since slavery around I think it was 2019. So it was the, response to, Africans, now Americans being in this country for such a long time. And so my college put on a conference called Black to the Future, Imagining Futures of African Americans. That was a very interesting conference to be a part of. I was able to host a plenary session where we had several different panel members come on and talk about their experiences and different things, and basically kind of reflecting on what the future could look like for African Americans in this country. And so the organizers of that conference and several other scholars in my college put together this edited collection. And so there's different areas that all reflect back on, kind of the origins of this conference. And so they entitled it Critical Race Studies Across the Disciplines because it's an interdisciplinary approach to understanding the activism of individuals across different disciplines that we have experienced and seen over the years. And so my particular project, I actually, before this book was even presented to me, I had an idea that I wanted to interview African American educators that taught during the desegregation era. I don't remember exactly what triggered me to be interested in that. I know I had, been interested in it from a younger age, and I've seen things, in different projects where they talk about it from the student perspective, they talk about it from a legal perspective, but I hadn't really seen much work where they actually interviewed the educators themselves. And so I wanted to look at what the culture and the climate of the schools were from that perspective. That's another thing I'm really into is organizational culture. And so I wanted to look at how would they describe the culture and the climate of the schools during this time period. And I was just blown away by the stories that these educators had to tell me. And I've actually decided to extend this into a book project. And I had the opportunity recently to interview a few more educators for the book that
Mm.
I'm in the process of proposing. I recognized immediately when conducting these interviews that, one chapter could not contain and could not do justice or respect to the experiences and the stories that they shared. And that is going to be very imperative for, potential educators, current educators, policymakers to really understand these experiences and the wisdom that these people shared. And so that's how I kind of revised the project for this particular chapter, basically saying that I wanted to share some lessons from them or some wisdom that they share with me because it wasn't really enough space to do all the work that I wanted to in one particular chapter. I did my best to encapsulate that, and we had 10 different lessons that came out of these particular interviews. And, literally it was like a one little blurb from each person. But it was a very influential and very impactful experience for me and humbling as well. Because several of these people who had taught in the school districts, and this was at a time where many of them actually taught in the same school district or the same school for their entire careers.
Hmm.
So, people don't really do that anymore.
Yeah.
But, they really were able to share experiences about, their experiences during segregation, integration. Some of them taught in integrated schools. Mostly all of them, no, all of them actually have been educated in segregated schools and then taught in the integrated schools and had to go through that process. So many of them, some of them ended up crying as we were interviewing because they hadn't thought about some of these experiences. I had the opportunity to interview individuals that were in different cities around the country. And so it wasn't just one particular school district, but really all around the country. So I got a very different take depending on where that particular educator taught and had their career. So that was a very interesting experience for me.
I grew up in the suburbs of St. Louis, and I attended a school district that participated in the desegregation of the school districts between St. Louis City and St. Louis County.
Mm.
And I have like really vivid memories of those times of being in school. I'm wondering what are some of the major lessons that the teachers conveyed to you about some of their major takeaways during that time period? Because I experienced it as a kid, and so I was wondering what some of the teachers' big takeaways were from that time period as well, because I'm always interested in other perspectives and stories of desegregation.
So some of the lessons, one of them said, find and create a supportive community. Another one said, be prepared for consequences when you choose to speak up for what's right. Another one said, play the game, but don't compromise your values. Another one said, accept yourself as you are and be who you are. Another one said, give youngsters as much success as you can.
Mm.
Another one says, stay open minded and make things good for everyone. Another one said, I was respected because I was respectable. Another teacher said, find ways to make things work. And the last one said, be prepared to be the disciplinarian, show them that all kids can learn.
You open the piece with a story from your aunt as well. And I was just wondering if you could just speak to that a little bit, because I found that to be a really fantastic and touching opening to the essay.
Yeah, one thing I like to do in my research is connect to the people who paved the way for me to be who and where I am today. And so I talked about my Aunt Thelma when I opened this piece. My Aunt Thelma was a woman who was okay, let me start over. My Aunt
Sure.
Thelma was a woman who was educated in Edgemore, South Carolina. She was from Edgemore, South Carolina during that segregation period, during the Jim Crow era of history. And she only was educated to the eighth grade. There was no Black high school in the area that she was from. But you would not know that unless you knew that. The way she carried herself, which was she had much pride. She was always one that made sure that everyone else had. She was one of 12 children. And so she really made sure that the younger ones behind her were taken care of. My grandmother, which was her baby sister, and the younger ones of that group, they made sure that they got together, made sure that they had what they needed to get to high school. My grandmother and some of her brothers and sisters, the younger ones, they had to go away to a high school in another city and stay at a boarding house. They made sure that they, had the money they needed to pay for the boarding houses as they went away to school. They made sure that they went to college and had those opportunities. And it didn't stop with my grandmother and her younger brothers and sisters, but it was, when my mother and that generation came through, the same thing. My Aunt Thelma, cleaned homes. She was a housekeeper. She cleaned homes for people, and that money she used not only to take care of herself, but to make sure that my mom and her cousins and her sisters were able to go to college and, had what they needed and, wash their clothes and, did whatever was that extra support that was needed to make sure that we had access to education. I went to her house almost every day after school in middle school so that I could go to the school that I went to. I went to a magnet school in middle school, and so I can say this now, I guess, but I used her address to go to school
Yeah.
to to even go to that school. And so I would, ride the bus home from middle school every day to her house, or I would walk home to her house and sit in her kitchen, and she would fix me lunch or fix me my little snack, and I would sit there and watch Oprah and do my homework. So
Mm.
a lot of that comes from that time period. But she would always tell me when it was time to do homework, okay, get your lesson, get your lesson. And it was amazing how important education was to her, although she was never afforded the opportunity to be fully educated. She's one of those that I have to honor and wanted to honor in this work because had it not been for her, I know I wouldn't be who I am. She couldn't help me with my homework, but she made sure I did it, and so those are one of those things that, although she wasn't an educator in her own right as far as a professional standing, she taught me everything that she knew. And be it about discipline, be it about process. I remember days that I walked into her kitchen and it was, a lot of jars sitting all over the room that she could can peaches and green beans and cha-cha and other things. And she would go out and have peaches, and you would walk into the house, and it would smell like peaches in certain seasons. Or we would be shucking corn and shelling peas sometime with her, and she would just sit and talk to me about things. And one of the things that she would say often is, "That's the secret. That's the secret." But literally, pretty much the secrets that she was teaching me really were life lessons or keys to success. And so I wanted to start off just by opening it up and talking about her and how, tie it back to her in some way. And that's why partly entitled to Get Your Lesson. Because I could have just said gleaning wisdom from African American educators and made it sound really scholarly. But
Mm.
I wanted to make sure that I honored her in my work. And that's something I try to do in all of my research is honor those people who, made it possible. Even in the civil rights period, there were so many unsung heroes and so many voices of individuals that played a part and made a sacrifice and gave their last dime or nickel to forward the movement. And we will never know their names. We will never hear their stories. And so I wanted to make sure I pay homage to her in some way by adding a piece of her story, because I feel like her story was just important as the educators that I interviewed. Even though she may not have been qualified to be in my sample, she was still qualified to be a part of my story.
Wonderful. Well, I know you said you're going to work on a book on that. Do you have a timeline or some goals with that, expanding that project?
Well, I hope to be done in the next year or so. That's my goal. We'll
Fabulous.
see what happens, because we know in academia and the publishing world, sometimes our
Yeah.
timelines don't always make it. But I really hope that within the next year, I'm able to at least have the publication on the way. So that is a goal of mine.
Wonderful. Well, just want to let you know that if you want to come back on the podcast when the book is ready to go out into the world, and you want to come on and hang out again, definitely just let me know. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, let's move on to another project that you did. This is one that I am really interested in as well. You have an article called Examining Website-Based Mission Statements of Traditionally Black Methodist Denominational Churches in the Top 10 Cities for African Americans in the United States. And that comes from the Journal of Communication and Religion. And this is a super interesting project. And I want to know just at the beginning, like, what got you into studying mission statements on denominational websites for Black Methodist churches? Where does this interest come from?
All right, so going back to some of my research interests, I study organizational culture. I think that's the thing that I realized, or the umbrella term that really captures a lot of my work. And so mission statements are a typical artifact of culture that we can see. But it's not just an artifact, but it's actually what organizations use to guide their decision making, to guide their budgets, to really focus on what are we here for? What's our mission? When we talk about churches, churches tend to operate on an implicit mission, not necessarily an explicit mission, meaning that a lot of churches or religious groups, particularly Christian churches, I'll say that for the sake of this conversation, they want to operate under the general understanding that the Great Commission is their mission. They want to save the world for Christ. How many churches have we gone into and they say that that's their mission? But what
Hmm.
does that mean, and what does that look like in individual spaces? So I had an idea just to, first of all, look into what mission statements look like in churches. But then I also wanted to know, are these mission statements visible for the public? Can people access them? Part of the reason why I feel like it's important for external audiences to assess mission statements is because this generation is very web-based. And so if I'm searching for a new church, if I'm moving to a new town, and I may see a lot of great pictures, but I might want to say, okay, so what do you all do? What's your purpose? And I want to connect with purpose. And if these churches aren't necessarily putting those mission statements on a forward-facing basis, in my mind, it could be difficult for them to attract the audiences that they want to attract, or people that are interested in the same thing that they are. And so, me serving in a Black Methodist denomination, at first I did a conference presentation where I looked at this in the denomination where I serve, which is the AME Zion Church. And so I started off just looking at the AME Zion Church. I looked at one Episcopal area, which is one of the regions that one particular bishop would serve. And I realized very quickly that that particular area, the majority of the churches didn't even have websites. So it
Hmm.
wasn't even enough options for me to even do this study. And so I said, okay. So then I said, well, what's a different approach that I can take to get a larger population? And so I was flipping around at different things. And I said, well, what's the top? I think I had seen something on the news where they were talking about the top cities for African Americans. I said, okay, let's look at that. I used the locator tool on the denominationals websites and pulled all the names of all the churches in those cities. And then I started looking up websites. I did a basic Google search, looking at websites, and then I just asked the question: did they have a website? Was the mission statement on the website, and what can we learn from their mission statements? And so that's what I did for all of those churches, and for the AME Zion Church at first. Did the conference presentation. I said, you know what, this is something I need to publish, and so I went and looked at the other sister denominations to the AME Zion Church, which is the AME Church and the CME Church, which are the major Black Methodist denominations. And so I said, let's pull them all together. Let's look at them across the board, because by them all being Methodist, Black Methodist denominations, I wanted to know, are their missions similar? Are they different? Is there something that we can learn here? And so there was a total of 219 churches in these 10 cities across all three denominations. 58 of them published their mission statements, 59 did not. So that's about half. And 102 of them did not have a website at all. So I only had about 58 churches to work from. And, I just looked at what did those particular mission statements say about the church, what words were important to them, which type of phrases were important to those mission statements. And so, I realized that outreach and evangelism was very important to them. Discipleship, spiritual development, ministry and service, and community. So those are the types of words and the themes that really came out as being important to those. But it was a very interesting project that I was able to work on, and I've been able to share it with denominational officials across all three denominations, and just kind of give them more insight into what is important. I've been able to, since doing this project, do some leadership training for different churches, just to help them to understand, first of all, that you need to have a mission statement. Because a lot of churches didn't. They felt like it was understood. How to develop a mission statement, how to use your mission statement to make decisions within your church. What programs are you going to have? What audiences are you trying to connect with? Who should be your partners? Who should be your benefactors? All of that is very, very important to understand, and you can't do that without an effective mission statement.
What do you plan to do any more work in this area around mission statement studies and things like that?
Absolutely. I think I'll continue to do the work around mission statements. They'll probably be with different contexts. I probably will try to look into other organizations, other religious organizations. Another passion of mine, of course, because of my tie to education and youth ministry, I want to look at youth serving organizations and do a similar study as well to see, how, they articulate their mission, the things that they find to be important, and then probably end up doing some follow-up conversations with people in those organizations to see if they're actually living up to those missions. But those are all projects I think will be in the future, and hopefully I'll get to work with doctoral students one day, and some of them will have an interest in doing some of that work. I realize that a lot of times my ideas and vision for some of this work is more than I probably can do alone, and so I really look forward to being able to work with others that really have a passion for some of these same interests as well.
Wonderful. Well, Darius, I'm really excited about learning about some of your interests earlier on whenever you were talking about all your experiences in media and TV and radio, because, you're a part of this Sacred Rights program that I'm interviewing everybody in the cohort. And I'm wondering what drew you to this opportunity for these public scholarship trainings, and how you're finding the experience so far.
So I'm finding it a great experience. Overall, it's been a great experience. I've been able to collaborate and meet with people who have similar interests to mine, but not necessarily the exact same interests. And network has been great to get in touch with people that are able to support with some of the ideas that I just honestly didn't know what to do with. Going back to your original question, the first part of the question, all right, so what drew me to sacred rights was the opportunity to learn how to be a public scholar. I knew that it was something I was very interested in. I just didn't know how to do it and do it effectively. And so taking the workshops, learning from the presenters, it's really allowed me to, understand better how to brand myself, how to present myself to public audiences. Because my interests are so diverse, the challenge that I had was, if someone asked me about doing an interview and they said, well, what can you talk on or what can you speak on? And I'm like, this and that and the other thing and the other thing and the this and that. So
Mm.
I didn't really know how to present myself to these different audiences or spaces where there may be opportunity. I can often be driven by my passion in the moment, and I don't always do a good job of recognizing what I'm good at. And so I've been able to, through this program, have space to better articulate that for myself, but then also hear from others when they look at my work and they look at the things that I've done both as a practitioner and a scholar and say, hey, I'd like to hear more about this, or, maybe you would be good at talking about that. And it's really helped me to get an external look at myself and my expertise. Because it was a very hard process for me to do that on my own. So I've definitely been appreciative of having the opportunity to gain support, strengthen my network, gain new friends, gain new colleagues that can help assist along the way. And, even being able to be a referral for people when they say, hey, I can't talk about this, but can you? And vice versa. And
Mm.
so it's been a great opportunity overall.
Wonderful. They talk about the three R's, the risks, rewards, and responsibilities of public scholarship. What are some reflections on those three R's in relation to the work and the fields that you're in?
Oh, man. So that was a really interesting conversation that we had in class. And it took me to one of the first interviews I did on a national stage, was around when the big issues that people were having on critical race theory and education. And so that was around the same time that the article came out that we just spoke of, critical race studies across the discipline. And I was sharing about the experiences of Black educators on desegregation. So I got, a couple of people reached out to me for different interviews. And, I shared some perspective. I thought that I was objective. I thought that I was just offering a scholarly perspective on the issues. Even when the interviewers tried to make me slant, I felt like I was staying neutral. But man, when I tell you, after that clip aired, I started getting emails, and I was like, "Where did these come from?"
Mm.
And literally, my little clip on the news was probably about 5 to 10 seconds. It wasn't even that long, and I would never think that people would go to the extent of looking me up, emailing me, being critical. I won't say harassing, but almost borderline harassing. And I had to go to the media specialist at my university and be like, hey, is this normal? Like, what do I do? And so when we got to talking about risk, responsibilities, and reward, I had a very real moment to connect to that topic because there are risks, and I didn't realize that, there were people out there who would be violently almost upset about me speaking on those topics on television, or not agreeing with my perspective. And, although I didn't necessarily feel threatened, I realized how people could feel threatened. The responsibility, I think I always was clear on because I recognized as being a trained media person from undergrad that, whatever you put out there, it impacts the audience and has an influence on people. And so I think I always knew that there was a responsibility there. I knew that there could be potential rewards, not just for myself, but for others, be it in the form of additional opportunities, be it in the form of monetary opportunities, or even just influence, things like that. But I think the risk were the things that really I underestimated. And so having an opportunity to talk through that, and not just risk for myself, but even for certain communities, because, if I get into speaking about a particular topic and, people are unaware of it, particularly in certain communities where the community has been a safe space for people. And then I put the information out in a public forum. Now, is it still a safe space for them? And so those are some of the questions that I had to ask myself and will continue to ask myself as I gain more opportunities on the on public forums to do this work that I feel strongly called to.
Wonderful. What are some of your goals in this public scholarship realm in the next couple of years?
Oh man, I would love to be a commentator on CNN, MSNBC.
Hmm.
I would love to have opportunities to do more podcasts like this, such as speaking with individuals like yourself. I would love to do the things that I thought that I would do earlier on in my career and just, be present in media spaces, to be consulted on different projects, be it movies, be it television shows when they need a different perspective. I just really want to be the guy that people call on when they need another look, when they need a different perspective, when they want to hear the voice that is not necessarily always the dominant voice and perspective. And so those are the types of things that I would love to do, man. I would really want to be present in more public spaces and offer the world the things that I've been holding back to myself.
Excellent. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch and follow along with what it is that you're doing?
All right. A great way to reach out to me is through my website, www.dmbenton.com. And there you'll be able to send me direct messages as well as find out more information about what I have going on and my social media platform.